Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to talk to you briefly about how to go about getting a successful upgrade and the low energy high-rise project which was undertaken by the Warren Centre and what it taught us about our approach to buildings. Like all good projects, it started with a view that new was better. Engineers love new shiny things. New must be better, it must be more efficient. So if it's old, it's obviously got a problem, which is pretty depressing given the trajectory we're all on. So the low energy high-rise project, like all good projects, it started out to prove something and pretty quickly found that it couldn't. And that was to look at buildings and work out, well, new must be better, therefore we should be able to prove it. It was a major survey of building attributes and management characteristics. So it was looking at why, when we have two buildings side by side, that for all intents and purposes are equal, does one always perform differently to the other? Steve said no two buildings are alike. No two buildings are alike in the way they are set up. No two buildings are alike in the way they are operated. And no two buildings are alike in the way that they perform. And that's a really critical question for our industry, because it challenges us to say, well, can we make this building perform better? Why is that building next door to that one performing so much worse? What is it about this particular building that makes it perform? It used energy and water ratings through neighbours because it was very easy to index. It took these performance figures to look then at the management attributes of the building, how the building was configured, and say, is there statistical significance there? So did it correlate to a higher neighbours rating? And the key concern was still energy efficiency. As Roger pointed to, water is still relatively cheap. It's very difficult to validate water efficiency upgrades, but there is so much still to be done in terms of energy efficiency, and it's still a day-to-day challenge. The project concluded that there were significant improvements available as a result of building operations, and that operations had a far greater influence than what we understood. It was improvements of up to 30% and a 1-star on average improvement, which in a neighbours scale is quite a significant opportunity. And when you're talking about non-CapEx related improvement opportunities, it's really significant. And it's equivalent to a 1.2% reduction in Australia's total greenhouse gas emissions, which is quite an achievement if you think about it. So this is without significant expenditure. So what we did in the next stage of the low energy high rise is we took these conclusions and said, well, let's take all the statistically significant factors and relate them back to how you operate a building and how you approach that building to get the performance. The interesting thing about low energy high rise is it totally changed the way we approach it. So if you think about it, we tended to previously look at a B, C or D grade building or a poor performing building and say, right, what needs to be improved? What do we rip out and make better? Now, our approach at times in the past has been a little bit like taking a Hyundai and putting a Formula One engine in it. It's not the right solution. And it's important to look at, when you're talking about buildings that were built 10, 20, 30 years ago, to ask the question, is the building still doing what it was designed to do? And am I still operating it the way it was designed? Now this is really fundamental if you think about it. 30 years ago, female employees got married and retired. And this is the time when these buildings were built. You had buildings where people had their own offices. They were large offices. They were very significant. You could still have a scotch at your desk. But things have moved on quite considerably since then. Those petitions have been brought down. We work in open plan offices. But you may not have changed anything about the fundamental design of your building. So it's very, very important to understand your building and understand, right, how was it designed? How does this work with the way I'm operating it today? And this is fundamental when you go into any lease deal. When you have leasing agents that then say, yes, that's fine, we can maintain the 4.5-star rating, but we've gone from leasing this floor to a banking tenant who has their executive there, so they have a 1 in 20 density on the floor, to we're now going to lease it to a call centre with a vastly different proposition. These things matter, and it's about looking at the jigsaw pieces and saying, have I still got the same picture? So just following on from what Steve said, what low energy high rise really taught us, and this is really fundamental to getting a really good outcome from your upgrade, is it's first about operating. So operating the performance of your building, knowing, are things oversized? Are things on when they shouldn't be? Do I understand my BMS? Steve used the example of things being set up to run 24/7 for a tenant's needs, but that tenant has changed. That happens all the time with things like, public holiday schedules change every year. If you are not looking at how your BMS is set up and not vigilantly checking that, I can guarantee you will have a day where no one's in the building and your building is operating. And that's a really lost opportunity. Maintaining, it's not sexy, but it's good. And I tell you what, when it goes pear-shaped, it's very, very bad. So identifying the easy wins, making sure every party is responsible for their area of responsibility. So if you have a contractor that comes in that undertakes routine maintenance, you should ensure that there is a requirement that they deliver that performance, that there is no detriment to the plant and equipment so that you go backwards. And once you've got those two understood, working well, and things are working, then you can look at improving. And it is a vastly different proposition to coming in with an assumption that old is poor and needs to be replaced, because you will have a very, very different proposition. There are buildings that I've worked on where we thought we had a problem child, and it turned out that there were some really cost-effective solutions to be found. And my experience has taught me that the problem children buildings are the exception, not the rule. But probably 3 years ago, we started out with a view that if it wasn't Green Star built or it hadn't been set up that way, it was probably going to be a problem child, but it's not. And it is because underpinning good sustainability is good design, good engineering, and efficient operations. And these are not new concepts. So engineers that have been there since the dawn of time, setting up these buildings, saying, right, how much energy have I got? What plant and equipment have I got? How do I optimise this design? Yes, Steve's right, there will often be some additional capacity and some redundancy built into it, and it is a belt and braces approach with engineering. That just reinforces the need to go back and look at your building and understand how it's operating, and is that design consistent with what you want the building to do now. So the low energy high rise really demonstrated that getting the day-to-day right was absolutely crucial. Because as soon as you have if you have a 2-star neighbours rating, but you have 2 pumps operating when one is fine, you have overnight load when you could minimise it quite significantly. That 2-star neighbours operation is not really 2-star because of the building, it's 2-star because of the way you've got some things configured. So you need to strip out that noise and get back to what can the building really do. So unless you get the day-to-day right, you're never going to see that, and you're going to hand a consultant a dream job where you say, I've got a 2-star building and I want a 4.5 or 5-star building, can you fix it for me? And they walk around and go, sweet. All I need to do is turn some stuff off. This will be the easiest money I make this year. You can take those opportunities yourself. And then when you get to that improvement stage, you can sit down with the consultant and you can really play with the building, and you can really start to identify, right, my chillers are only 8 years old. How are they going? Yes, I could get some better efficiency, but they're not too bad. But the way I structure my cooling cycles could significantly be changed. Now, one's $1 million job, the other one is not at all. So it's about trading off these things and looking for these opportunities. Ensure the necessary skills are covered, making sure you've got people who know what they're doing in the building, and this goes for not just your team in the building, but also the contractors, the people coming into the building. Very, very important. And then consider the building structure and services. So knowing your baseline, what is normal operation? Is my building a 2-star because it's a 2-star building, or is it a 2-star because I've got things on when they shouldn't be? Normal operating limits. What is a good day for this building? What is a bad day for this building? There is no point looking at a season where it's been incredibly mild over the summer and saying, hey, we are doing so well. You need to take that factor out of the equation. So you need to be able to ask yourself, did we do really well because we didn't have a single day over 32 degrees? Or did we do really well because we have been more efficient? And it's about understanding those things. Can you turn anything off? And can you use any passive systems? Steve mentioned using night purge, and you have to do these things cautiously. But it's about looking at the opportunity and saying, what will the building give me? What can the building do for me? Does this building have a good exterior, a good facade, a good shading coefficient in the glazing? Yes, great, okay, fantastic. Then I don't need to worry about these things as much. So I can look at things like having operable blinds as opposed to having a really, really heavy cooling schedule. And what do you need to better identify areas for improvement? And this is about finding the information you need about that building. If you need someone to come in and do an assessment or a review of plant and equipment, if you need your controls contractor to give you a review of the controls because they're so old and you can't find, the functional description doesn't look like it's been opened for a while, you don't know what's operating, how it's configured, understand these things. If that means that you spend a little bit of money to get someone to come in and say, yes, this is a problem because of this, or no, this is fine, but just to let you know, in about 3 years, this model will be obsolete, so you're going to have some challenges in terms of getting parts and maintaining this equipment. That's really important, because if you think that a piece of plant and equipment should be replaced now, you need to understand what does now look like. What's the performance specification like? Is it doing what I want it to do? What's the market like? What else is out there? Or is this facing obsolescence? Knowing your baseline and rolling annual totals. A really good month does not a NABERS rating make. And the trouble with NABERS ratings is it's cumulative. So the number of times I've been shown charts and there's the performance line and it's just below the NABERS target and everyone says, oh, we'll be all right. It doesn't magically pop over the line of the 11th month. It all adds up. Like anything, it's due diligence and maintenance on the process. And you have to stay on top of it. So if you want to get a good NABERS rating and you have a NABERS target, you need to be exceeding that target more months than you aren't. Just meeting it, it's going to cut it awfully fine. And the trouble with NABERS ratings is there are often challenges. So if you have a bill that goes missing and you need to estimate that bill, you know, if that's in the middle of summer and you've had a big cooling load, it's not going to be as favourable for your NABERS rating. So you have little things like that, you need to give yourself a bit of a buffer zone. So moving on to maintaining a sustainable building, monitoring, understanding what your building is doing is really important. And like I said, looking at those consumption profiles and knowing, well, was it because it was a really mild summer or was it because the building was doing well? Did you have lift maintenance being done and you had half your lifts locked out? Did you have 3 floors vacant and you were able to isolate that air conditioning? And understanding all the building systems is crucial. I have worked in a building where it had a wonderful underfloor heating system. The instructions for that underfloor heating system were in German. The building manager did not speak German, and nor did the building engineer. This was obviously a flaw in the recruitment process, so the heating system never got used. Now that was a big chunk of money that was put into the development process. So it's knowing, you know, what have I got in this building, what works and what doesn't. And the reality is this is going to get more complicated. Green Star buildings are looking to push the envelope. And the global economy means that we are likely to have more equipment with instructions in German. So it's about understanding these systems and saying, well, this is a practical solution. And the challenge is with buildings, what we often do is divorce the development process from the operations process. So what we tend to do with building operators is, it's like driving a car, getting out of the car, handing them the keys and saying, there you are, off you go. And we don't ask the question of, can you drive a manual? Do you have a license? We don't ask these questions. So you get given a car, you don't know how it operates, and you're asked to drive it. And not only drive it, but drive it really efficiently and potentially win a Formula One contest while you're at it. Managing third parties is also really important. Incentivised and penalised contractors. Making sure people are incentivised. You've got to make the right thing easy and the wrong thing hard. If they do the wrong thing and stuff up a control system or something in your building, it will take you months to identify it and recover it. And if you've got a NABERS target that year, it can be an absolute disaster. And I'm pretty certain everyone in this room has seen evidence of that in different buildings. Useful consultants. If you bring in a consultant who has grand designs and grand views about new and exciting, wonderful developments, and you know we have to rip everything out, and you're looking to do a very modest and very conservative retrofit of your building, and you don't believe that there is a lot in the building that's flawed, and you believe it just needs tweaking more than redesigning, you're probably not going to see eye to eye. So making sure you've got the right fit in terms of consultants is really important. Regular and competent maintenance. The bottom line is you have to understand what this is like for your building. And with lower grade buildings where you may not have central plant and equipment, you may have individual package units, you need to understand what's that configuration look like. And if it's all gone pear-shaped, where I've seen buildings where it's like Murphy's Law, one package unit starts to fail and they seem to talk to each other. And they fail just after the contractor's left. So, you know, okay, well hang on, these individual units cost me this much money. What does a redesign and central plant look like for this building? What's that proposition look like? And is that inevitable? Is that something we need to look at to get with the program with this building? So it's about, you know, knowing what's coming down the track. Roger alluded to it that, you know, sometimes looking globally, even where legislation gets watered down, it's very useful from a crystal ball perspective to say, you know, these requirements are probably just going to get tighter. So doing the minimum now, make sure you know what that looks like and whether or not it causes problems down the track, because you don't want to sink a heap of money into a project that gives you no room to move for the future. So knowing what this breakdown is like for your building is really important, because it's there that you can identify what's operating efficiently and what's not. When maintenance is not maintenance. This is sadly a true story. That big chunk of yellow there was where the cooling tower contractor came to service the cooling towers and left the fast fill valve on. And it was a building that didn't have on-site management. And it ran for a number of days before it was identified and created a thumping great big hole in our neighbours' water data for the year. It's amazing how quickly just a couple of days of basically a tap left running can vastly change your performance outcome. Sadly, I've seen this happen several times, and really depressingly, I was at a conference once and everyone had a variation of this slide, which was a bit dismal, all off different buildings. The second time I saw this happen, because we had the data, we took a printout of the graph, we took the numbers, and we took our water bill, and we sent a letter to the cooling tower contractor and we said, this is what your maintenance did, this is what it caused, and while we are grateful for the water feature you created down the outside of the building, we believe this is what it cost us. Now, relative to that maintenance contract, it was not a big sum of money, but they couldn't refute the evidence and they wrote a cheque. Interestingly, internally, they started a retraining process with a lot of their team to make sure it didn't happen again, because they saw a problem in writing these cheques over and over again. So, but the bottom line is you've got a system where you are getting people to do the right thing, and where they influence a performance outcome, you have a mechanism to incentivise it. That wasn't something that was done because we had a contractual clause that allowed us to do that. It was just simply common sense. We gave them the evidence and we said, look, this is what we think you cost us. We would like the cheque. And it was a bit hard to argue with, so they did. So you don't need to always have lawyers sitting there to get these things incentivised. Finally, the final step is improving a sustainable building. And this is very important. So if you have the operations, you have the maintenance right, your understanding of the building and your identification of where there are opportunities, what is a problem and what is not a problem, will be vastly improved. And it's by going through that process that you'll be able to optimise the upgrade opportunity of that building. So understanding what are your limitations. I worked on a building where we had a mixed mode air conditioning system, which theoretically shouldn't really be in an office building. We thought it was a real problem child. Our estimates were something in the order of $2 million, a total redesign of the HVAC system. We found a $30,000 solution to that problem. So asking the question, yes, let's think outside the box for a moment. Just because it's this system and it's operating this way doesn't mean that's the way we have to keep it operating going forward. So knowing how it can work and knowing what might work differently for your building is a really good opportunity. But you have to strip out that noise that comes from poor operations and poor maintenance. Identifying what's easy to fix. That was an example of the $30,000 solution, but it was just a mindset. Can you better leverage your CapEx or R&M budget? One of the things that working with operations team I used to see all the time is, because they'd be worried about what CapEx they'd be allowed, they'd do something like a chiller replacement strategy over 5 years, replacing a chiller a year. Now, chillers aren't the big expense in a chiller replacement project. getting cranes in, doing design work, knocking out walls because back of house is always so appallingly designed, there's no access. All these elements cost money, and if you're going to spend that money every time you do a chiller replacement, you're going to pay exponentially more if you spread out that project. So sometimes the smart money can be, well, hang on, can we bring all this together and do it in one go? And thereby minimise some of these design costs and get more bang for our buck. And if that means that, and this comes back to knowing your building, okay, my chillers aren't efficient, but they're functioning, I don't have major maintenance problems, yes, they could go for another 2 years. That gives me 2 years to really plan and do this chiller replacement strategy properly. And then you've got much more opportunity to do things where you may change the chiller operation strategy quite radically. And you may look at 2 chillers that run in part load instead of 1 big chiller. There is still a tendency in the market to do a like-for-like approach in retrofitting. So yes, you get efficiency in terms of you're going with newer, more efficient equipment, but you go from a strategy if you've got 3 big chillers and 1 little chiller, and lo and behold, you replace it with 3 big chillers and 1 little chiller. That's a lost opportunity to say, well, hang on, can I retweak this? Can I look at the way this is configured? Get external advice, and like I said, make sure it's the right fit for your building. So the way I've structured consultancy projects is often doing a small overview or doing a neighbours review strategy, and then if we have a really good dialogue from that point of view, you expand it to, okay, write a strategic improvement plan for me. So I haven't overcommitted, and I've got lots of opportunity to ramp up the relationship with that consultant if I think they're on the same page, or I can also step back from it and develop a strategy. Like I said about the chillers, moving your chiller replacement strategy a bit later to put more on the table is about the strategic approach to the building. And if you have that strategic approach, you will absolutely get more out of the upgrade opportunity, and you'll be able to put more on the table. And then you'll be able to do things like, you may look at bundling things like through an environmental upgrade agreement, and you can get more bang for your buck. The cost of going more efficient versus business as usual. This is something that I call the incremental cost benefit of sustainability. Because I used to get asked all the time, why should I spend $2 million replacing chillers? And I'd say, well, you have to spend $2 million replacing chillers because your current chillers are dying, and you said in your lease that you provide air conditioning, so it's really got nothing to do with sustainability. But I'll show you how to spend that $2 million and spend it really efficiently. And in this example, you can see that the difference between a business as usual replacement strategy and a higher energy efficiency, more sustainable option was $160,000. It's not a lot of money relative to the overall project. The operational cost benefit was an $88,000 per annum saving. Now in this circumstance, yes, the tenant was getting the benefit of that $88,000 per annum, but it's still back to Roger's point. It gives you more leverage in your discussions with your tenants, and it improves your relationship because as a landlord you can say, here's an improvement I made, and here's where the benefit is for you, and it's quantifiable. And important to the process is documenting. I've asked the question of a room full of consulting engineers who's been into a building, and all the drawings and plans and upgrades have all been documented and everything's there, and no one ever puts up their hand. Having the process documented, understanding what changes you've made, understanding what the building can do, how it's configured, how it's been set up. Having a building logbook is really important. Get the Green Star report. The number of buildings that were developed, like I said, that development process is disassociated from the operations process. So get the Green Star report. Ring someone and say, have you got it? Can I have a look at it? And it'll give you much more insight into, oh, okay, this was the intent with this building. Neighbours rating, a building energy efficiency certificate, understanding what information you've got that might benefit you in understanding how your building is performing. Understanding the design elements. The building I worked on had everything, absolutely everything designed about it. Had a crane in the middle of the building. Very, very end of the construction process, the tenant said, hey, if you took out that crane, could we have an internal stairwell? The developer said, yeah, you could, that'd be great. So they took out the crane, put in an internal stairwell, and didn't redesign a thing. Now, needless to say, that HVAC system did not function the way it was intended to with design. So it had a lot of issues in terms of airflow and pressure throughout the building. The pot plants used to sway in the wind on certain levels, and in other levels you couldn't get any airflow at all. So it was quite was quite interesting. So understanding, what was the design of the building? Was it built in accordance with design? And is that a problem? Because there are a lot of buildings out there where changes were made during the construction process, and it actually benefited the building. Making sure everyone in the process, like your leasing agents, know what the buildings can do, so you don't overcommit to a tenant, and identify the people who can assist, so you build your team. And then finally, I'd just like to thank the sponsors who assisted us in the low energy high-rise project, and the Green Building Fund particularly. It was a very beneficial project. So thank you.